If we've learned anything in our walk through Genesis so far, hopefully we've learned a lot. One of the things we've learned is that the Bible never shies away from telling difficult parts of its story. From moments where we scratch our heads going, what was God thinking? Why did he demand that? Or a whole bunch of times where we look at the main characters and go, what were they thinking? How could they possibly behave in that way and still, be God's people? This is craziness. It's actually one of the parts about the Bible that I really love the most. That it's evidence to me that the Bible is true. And here's why. If you're trying to convince people of a lie, if you're trying to manipulate them into believing something that isn't true, you make the story easy, you make the story simple, you make the story believable. But if you're simply telling a true story, even when things don't make sense in it, because it's true, you leave it in. Right? It's like if you're watching a movie or reading a book and you're reading a biography, or you're reading a true event that actually took place, and there are times where you shake your head and go, there's no way they'd sell this in a fiction book. It's just too crazy to believe. But because it's true, they keep it in, right? So this is one of the evidences to me of the Bible's truth, is that it keeps the difficult parts in, the hard to explain and hard to understand parts in. All of that to say, boy, today is definitely going to be one of those hard to understand parts. Today we're going to take a look at Genesis 34, and as you can already see by the title, this is going to be a tough one. It's a story about Dinah, and it's a story of rape and revenge. I mean, right there, if you come with me this far after reading the title and you still want to watch it, God bless you, because that's I'm not going to disguise the title into something that it's not either. That's what today's is about. In fact, today's lesson is challenging enough that I'm not even going to have on-screen notes. So instead of keeping my little head in the corner here, I'll give myself a big head in the middle here. There we go. Uh, there we go. But I might as well fill more of the screen than I usually fill, because um, we're not going to put any notes up there. Because what we're going to do is we're going to walk through this story. We're going to see some of the things that happen in it, and then we're going to try to make as much sense of it as we can as we go through it. But it's just simply one of those challenging stories. So, well, let's get right to it. We'll walk through it together. This remember, to get into the story, first of all, 3 episodes ago, if you remember, we had the baby making contest in Genesis chapters 29 and 30. And in that baby making contest, they mentioned the births of 11 sons, but only one of the daughters is mentioned. Is not because they only had one daughter, and they probably had many daughters all along the way, but only one daughter is mentioned. And in today's chapter, we're going to find out why that one daughter named Dinah is mentioned. What we've got is Jacob, after having run away for his life, after having deceived his brother through the plot that his mom cooked up. Remember that. He has had to run away for 20 years. He's found himself in his relative Laban's territory. He's married both of Laban's daughters, or two of Laban's daughters. We don't know how many he had altogether. They had the baby making contest. He then realizes, I've got to go back to the land that I belong in. He has now come back to the promised land after having been gone for 20 years. His brother Esau, surprisingly and nobly and honorably, welcomes his brother back. And now they're in the land. So they've just landed there. They're just now in the land. And then we have this story, chapter 34 of Genesis, verse 1. Now Dinah, the daughter of Leia, the daughter Leia had born to Jacob, went out to visit the women of the land. So this is actually a sweet moment. They're barely back in. They're just beginning to set up house. And Leah decides, oh, I'm going to go and visit the neighbor women. This is really kind of a sweet moment. So uh, Jacob's daughter-in-law, Leah, I'm sorry, Jacob's wife, one of Jacob's wives, Leah. This is one of those places where I'm debating, should I restart it? But no, I'm not going to restart it. I'm just going to keep going. Jacob's wife, Leah, goes to visit their neighbors. Kind of sweet. But here's what happens when she goes out, chapter 34, verse 2. When Shechem, son of Hamor the Hivite, the ruler of that area, saw her, he took her and raped her. Talk about a blunt turn of events here. Hey, we're brand new in the neighborhood. Let's go out and see the neighbor ladies. The ruler of the area sees her, takes her, rapes her. This, for me, first of all, just on a Bible basis, we've already seen a couple rapes in Scripture. We'll see more as they come along, because, again, the Bible doesn't shy away from the difficult parts of the story. Previous times, the translators, not the Bible itself, but the translators of the Bible use words like sex or made love. And each time I said, it's not that, it's rape. This is the first time that we've seen in Genesis where the translators use the correct term. Again, this is not that the Bible used the incorrect term. The Bible always uses the correct term, but the translators of the Bible from Hebrew into English have finally called this act what it is, which is rape. Okay? It's rape. Chapter 34, verse 3 now. His heart was drawn to Dinah, daughter of Jacob. He loved the young woman and spoke tenderly to her. Yeah, that makes up for rape. Not. I mean, okay. Continue on, verse 4. And Shechem said to his father Hamor, "Get me this girl as my wife." Wow, dude's spoiled much? Like, he sees a woman he likes. He doesn't woo her. He doesn't date her. He rapes her. He then feels drawn towards her, so he goes to dad and says, "Hey, get that woman for me as my wife." Yeah, that woman I raped. Get her for me as my wife. It's like, wow, what this is bad men behaving badly so far, right? Okay, at least at bare minimum. Chapter 34 now, verse 5, and let's get a few more verses in. When Jacob heard that his daughter Dinah had been defiled, his sons were in the fields with his livestock, so he did nothing about it until they came home. Then Shechem's father Hamor went out to talk with Jacob. Meanwhile, Jacob's sons had come in from the fields as soon as they heard what happened. They were shocked and furious because Shechem had done an outrageous thing in Israel by sleeping with Laban's daughter, a thing that should not be done. Again, they use the word sleeping with here. It should be translated as rape, but this is a translation issue. Again, this is not the Bible's fault. This is a translation issue that I have a problem with. Verse 8. But Hamor said to them, "My son Shechem has his heart set on your daughter." Oh, it's okay that he raped her. He loves her. Like, the sinful illogic here is so infuriating. "Please give her to him as his wife. Intermarry with us. Give us your daughters and take our daughters for yourselves. You can settle among us. The land is open to you. Live in it, trade in it, and acquire property in it." He's trying to cover over his son's rape. His son raping a daughter is what he's doing here. Verse 11. Then Shechem said to Dinah's father and brothers, "Let me find favor in your eyes, and I will give you whatever you ask. Make the price for the bride and the gift I am to bring as great as you like, and I'll pay whatever you ask. Only give me the young woman as my wife." Again, he's trying to justify his behavior, and yeah, he's got now an emotional attachment to her, but this is basically, what's it going to take to buy you off from me raping your daughter and sister? That's what's happening here. So it is amazing how we try to justify our sinful behavior, and this is just a small picture of the damage that this kind of abuse does. And an interesting side note to this: obviously, the damage to Dinah, having been the victim of rape, is by far the greatest damage that has happened and will happen in this story. But I also want you to note this: when abuse happens, while by far the greatest damage is done to the victim, it doesn't mean that the abuser gets off scot-free. The perpetrator is damaged by the sin they commit as well, to a far lesser degree than the victim. There's no moral equivalency here. But if you've got someone in your life who is behaving badly, the main reason you don't enable that is because their behavior is going to hurt other people. But secondarily, if you've got an abuser in your life and you're thinking, "Oh, but I love them, I want to take care of them," the best way you can care for an abuser who's in your family is to not enable them in their abuse, because they're not just hurting their victims, they're hurting themselves. You can't allow an abuser to get away with it for their own sake, which again is far, 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 far less than the damage they're causing to others. But it's also a reality. Abuse hurts the abuser to a far lesser degree than it hurts the victim, but abuse hurts the abuser as well. And if you've got an abuser in your life, don't enable them. Don't excuse them. That's what the father is doing here. The father is enabling and excusing the sinful abuse, the rape that his son has committed. Instead of stepping up and punishing him as the father should, he's enabling this to happen, which means somebody else is going to have to step in and bring justice. And it's going to be worse from outside the family, as we're going to see in a moment. Okay? Continue on, chapter 34, verse 13. Because their sister Dinah had been defiled, Jacob's sons replied deceitfully as they spoke to Shechem and his father Hamor. So Dinah's brothers say, we're going to protect our sister. We're going to we're going to pretend that we've got a plan to make everything right with them, but we're going to get back at them. Okay, that's what's happening here. Chapter 34, verse 14. They said to them, we can't do such a thing. We can't give our sister to a man who is not circumcised. Oh, rape isn't the issue. Non-circumcision is the issue. They're lying about that, but that's how they're going to get their revenge, okay? We can't give our sister to a man who is not circumcised. That would be a disgrace to us. Not that the rape was, right? But again, they're lying. The rape is the disgrace. They're reframing it to get back at them. Verse 15. We will enter into an agreement with you on one condition only, that you become like us by circumcising all your males. Then we will give you our daughters and take your daughters for ourselves. We'll intermarry with you if you do that. We'll settle among you and become one people with you. But if you will not agree to be circumcised, we'll take our sister and go. Now, in that culture, this is a deceit that's going to work, because in their culture, in the pre-covenant culture. Remember, they're still visitors in this land. This is a pagan culture. This is not Israel yet. I mean, it's not technically Israel yet, right? So what you've got here is you've got a land that is still overrun by pagan nations, and among these pagan nations, the way they kept civility between the tribes was when you showed up in another tribe, you'd say, okay, what are your religious rituals? And we'll participate in your religious rituals to your gods, and you participate in our religious rituals to our gods, and that's how we'll get along. And the only way you can do that is if the gods aren't real, right? You made up your gods, and we made up our gods, and we made up our rituals, and you made up your rituals. So let's just trade rituals and we'll get along, right? So that's what they're offering to do. They're saying, hey, we've got this weird ritual that our God requires. So if you want us to live among you, why don't you go along with this ritual and then we'll all be happy, right? They're doing this out of deception so that they can get revenge, but it's an offer that makes sense within that culture that they know is going to work. So what's the response? Chapter 34, verse 18. Their proposal seemed good to Hamor and his son Shechem. They thought, hey, this fixes everything. We'll do their religious thing and they'll forgive the rape and everything will be fine, right? Well, we'll see. Verse 19. The young man who was the most honored of all his father's family, here's part of the problem, right? He's the spoiled kid, is what that's saying. The young man who raped Dinah, he is, quote, the most honored of all his father's family. He's the spoiled brat of the family, right? He lost no time in doing what they said because he was delighted with Jacob's daughter. So Hamor and his son Shechem went to the gate of their city to speak to the men of their city. These men are friendly toward us, they said. Let them live in our land and trade in it. The land has plenty of room for them. We can marry their daughters and they can marry ours. But the men will agree to live with us as one people only on the condition that our males be circumcised as they themselves are. So it's not just his family, it's everybody in town's got to be circumcised. Won't their livestock, their property, and all their animals become ours? So let us agree to their terms and they will settle among us. Okay, let's pause here for a couple of things. First of all, notice what he says at the end. Let's go ahead with this. We'll all become circumcised. We'll just have this small little surgery, and then their livestock, their property, and their other animals will become ours. They're trying to do a double cross. Let's become circumcised. When we intermarry, we way outnumber them. Their stuff will become our stuff, and all we got to do is have this minor surgery, right? That's what they're trying to do. My question every time I read this is, how did the conversations go at home that night? So here, Shechem and Hamor, they go to all the men of the city. They say, okay, all you got to do is be circumcised. And then we can intermarry with these people. We can have all their stuff. And then these men have to go home to their wives and say, hey, guess what I've got to do? I mean, right? How do you present that as a husband to your wife? Hey, so how did work go today, dear? Well, Shechem and Hamor came up with this really cool idea. You know that new tribe that moved in among us? Yeah. Well, we can intermarry with them and take all their stuff. Oh, cool. What do you have to do? Well, you got to cut off your what? I mean, I know that's crude, but that's what's going on here, right? It's just, and you got to do it because his son did what? And somehow they convinced their families to excuse the rape, to work this plan that they think is going to deceive and get all of their property by having just this minor surgery called circumcision. All right. 34:24 goes along. All the men who went out of the city gate agreed with Hamor and his son Shechem, and every male in the city was circumcised. So the entire city. Okay. 3 days later, while all of them were still in pain, two of Jacob's sons, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, took their swords and attacked the unsuspecting city, killing every male. Wow. Now, a couple things I want you to note here. One, God did not command them to do this. This is them taking revenge and taking improper revenge, because the rest of the men of the city didn't do the rape. They didn't even condone the rape. Well, maybe they did if they heard, hey, she raped her, she was raped, and now we can take their stuff. So maybe there's some guilt on their part. But God did not say kill every man in the city because one person is guilty of rape, right? That's their idea. But strategically, and if you're talking about revenge, that's what happened. Let's weaken them, and only two men can go in with swords and knives and kill every male in the city, and they do. 35:26. They put Hamor and his son Shechem to the sword and took Dinah from Shechem's house and left. When I read this last time, this verse caught me. I went, they took Dinah from Shechem's house. You mean she's already in his house? So he rapes her. He says he's in love with her. He says, I want to marry her. And he's already taken her into his house. I mean, that's how far this has gone down the road before. By the time this happens, from our standpoint and looking back at their culture, it's just, what is going on here? There's a whole bunch of things I can't answer. This is why there's not a lot of here. Here's the lesson we learn from this. It's just a story we kind of have to walk through, right? Chapter 35, verse 27. The sons of Jacob came upon the dead bodies and looted the city where their sister had been defiled. They seized their flocks and herds and donkeys and everything else of theirs in the city and out in the fields. They carried off all their wealth and all their women and children, taking as plunder everything in the houses. So within a very short period of time, they've gone from a very wealthy, prosperous city to every man is dead, and all the women and all the children and all the property have been looted, confiscated, and removed from the city. It is a ghost town. Now, we look at that and go, wow, this is the sons of Jacob? I thought Jacob was a changed man. I thought he was Israel. I thought he was, trying to follow God. Well, read the next verse, chapter 35, verse 30. Then Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, you have brought trouble on me by making me obnoxious to the Canaanites and Perizzites, the people living in this land. We are few in number, and if they join forces against me and attack me, I and my household will be destroyed. So, first of all, Jacob had no part in this plan. He's shocked when he finds out what they've done. It's a plan that satisfied their need for vengeance, but it's not going to be good for their family in the long run. He's looking around and going, you just completely emptied out a city and made it a ghost town. You killed every man in the city. You've taken all of their wives and their children who are now left husbandless and fatherless, and you've taken all of their stuff and you've looted it and you've left it completely empty. There are other cities around here that we've got to get along with. When they look at the fact that we did that to one city, they're going to band together to go make sure they don't do that to our city. But I also want you to note what it is that Jacob is upset about and what he doesn't say anything about. He doesn't say, this is a cruel thing that you've done to that city, or this is dishonest, or this makes you murderers. He doesn't say that. He goes, this is going to blow back on me, guys. So his name has changed from Jacob to Israel, but some of that old character of me first is still hanging on. It's part of the frustration of seeing true stories of real people who had not just faults, but massive sins that they're still working through. So their response, Jacob's son's response to this is what? Chapter 35, verse 31. But they replied, should he have treated our sister like a prostitute? That's a pretty hard one to come back from, right? I mean, you can't blame them for that. Even prostitutes don't deserve to be raped. So he didn't treat her like a prostitute, because a prostitute at least has some willingness in the process, hopefully. Although we know for sure, of course, that a great deal of prostitution is anything but willing. But even then, even prostitutes don't deserve to be raped. Nobody deserves that. So anyway, that's where the chapter ends. The question now becomes, what possible lessons can we learn from this horrible story? That, bad behavior causes more bad behavior. Yeah, okay, that's part of it. Secondly, that if we enable bad behavior even in the lives of the people that we love, it's going to cause all kinds of damage down the road that we can't even perceive of. Yeah. But I think mainly the reason that this is in the story is this. We have to again put ourselves in the boots of the original readers of this story, written by Moses to the people who, after 400 years of slavery, long after the story has been told, the story is written, and it's written as the people are about to re-enter this land after having been 400 years in slavery. So he's telling stories about the people of the land and about their family's previous interaction with the people of the land. And so I think part of the lesson for the people about to go into this land, one is this is the kind of evil that has been perpetrated on us by the people in this land, so beware. And secondly, when as time goes along, God does order us to do things in war that seem horrific, this will remind them of why God is ordering these things to happen and why we cannot coexist with these people. It does not excuse the sins that were committed by Jacob or his sons, but it does describe the kind of peril that they are about to be in as they enter this land, which, again, by the time the story is told, it's hundreds of years later. But I think that's the primary thing. Mostly, though, I think this is a bridge in the narrative. This is the last full story that we're going to get in Genesis with Jacob as the main character. And now the story is going to shift to Jacob's sons. And we're beginning to get an insight into the kind of kids that his sons are now that they're grown up. And anyway, that now leads us to next week, in which Joseph now becomes the primary character for the rest of the book of Genesis. And next week we meet Joseph and his dreams. All right. Hopefully we'll see you next week. Trust me, from this point on, the the stories are much more pleasant than this, and we start seeing getting back to the main narrative, and we start seeing more of the salvation story unfold. So we'll see you next time. Thanks.